Time will do the body good as we put the disappointment of the Copa America behind us. I know it's impossible to do it because we're going to have the Copa America quarterfinals and semifinals, and we will imagine what could have been. Fox releasing these incredible numbers that the game on FS1, not even on Big Fox, FS1, the USA versus Uruguay game, topped off at like 4.7 million viewers. So you can imagine on Big Fox, I don't know if that was going to happen, a quarterfinal game in what would have been against Colombia, you're probably looking at 6 million. And, I mean, I'm also thinking about Mexico. Mexico missing out on a quarterfinal game on the 4th of July against Argentina. So, anyway, we can't think about it. It didn't happen. And we got to fix this. And there's a lot that's going to be working on this. And we hope we get it somewhat right. I think we look at the game as disappointing as it was. If there was no red card, we probably beat Panama. We're not having this conversation. Uruguay's a very good team, and with all the flaws that our player base had, we were in it. Probably should have ended up tied. It was a good performance, with the exception of not being able to score. I think a lot of people thought the way it was going that Uruguay was going to run all over us. That wasn't the case. It was a pretty even game. So there are some positive parts there. We have good players. We have a federation that has to figure these things out, and we should probably have a new coach. Just a few things with regards to the coach. I see a lot of people doing a victory lap, and you could almost see it coming. And it's not necessary, right? A lot of people have been critical of Gregg Berhalter the first day he was hired and saying Berhalter out, Berhalter out. Now that people like myself and Alexi Lalas and others are saying it, they're taking credit for it. And I just don't understand, because the reality is Gregg Berhalter, as we said in the past, should have not extended past the 2022 World Cup. But everything he did was part of the requirement. He did his job results-wise through the World Cup. What he didn't do is what we saw at the back end of 2023 and 2024 and the Copa America. Not good enough. Make a change. All right? No patting on yourself on the back, because nobody was perfect here on the criticism of this team, and we'll break it down here on the Soccer OG. Check out the Soccer OG podcast. I'll be joined by Brian Dunseth, my good friend, broadcast partner. We'll talk about the Copa America. We'll talk about the U.S. men's national team. We'll talk about Gregg Berhalter and Matt Crocker and U.S. Soccer. Like and subscribe us here. We're going to try and keep these videos going because there's a lot to talk about. All right? And nobody was right about the U.S. situation. I wasn't right. Heaven knows I was probably a little too... I cast a blind eye on some of the stuff Gregg Berhalter was doing, and I was wrong. And I wish I was more stern at the end of the World Cup to say, yeah, let's bring someone else in. Let's see how it works. But we're going to talk about the players today, because I think we can all agree they weren't as advertised. This is not a golden generation. This is a generation that has done nothing that the previous ones were able to do. And we got to ask ourselves, what did those previous generations do that were able to make a semifinal at a Copa America, that were able to make a quarterfinal at a World Cup, that were able to win a group, to beat Spain in the Confederations Cup? Why were these generations able to do this? This generation, which is now well into its prime, getting further away. Yes, we can say it's Gregg Berhalter. Are we going to put all the blame on Gregg Berhalter? We can't be that naive. We can't be that naive. It is screaming for a new coach, and I think one thing we can agree with about the players is there wasn't enough checks and balances. And Gregg Berhalter was spending too much time being their buddy instead of their coach, and he let the natives run wild, and this is what we had. And we have Tim Ream and other guys coming out saying this team just didn't look sharp training. I mean, that's a shock to the system. What? Why aren't you training hard? Why aren't you training to win? Why are you saying things like we're not taking the Copa America, we're focused on the World Cup? What is all that about? Now, that falls at the feet of Gregg Berhalter. And with regards to a change, I think a lot of people say he's not going to leave. I tend to think that there is a possibility. And I have heard from some good sources that we might hear something within, not right away, but a change. Just because we don't hear about a change now doesn't mean a change won't happen in a month or so. So I wouldn't rule that out. I I really think it makes a lot of sense. It will relieve U.S. soccer. We also saw from Doug McIntyre, and I wasn't sure about this, because of equal pay, that if you have to pay your new coach $4 million, and they'll have to buy out Gregg Berhalter, and that's money, but money you should pay, that if you pay a new coach, say $4 million, you would have to pay Emma Hayes $4 million. But Doug McIntyre, who's been a guest here on the OG podcast, said that's not the case. So that gives us some wiggle room. And maybe that inspires. I just think Matt Crocker is a guy with a great background in the Premier League, and he's just not going to sit here and say, okay. So I think there's a possibility. But let's talk about the players. And one thing that I overview about our roster, and this goes back from the Berhalter criticism, right? Where everyone was screaming, why are you playing the old guard? Why are you playing Sebastian Lletget? Why are you playing Shaq Moore, DeAndre Yedlin, or Paul Arriola? Why are you playing them? So 2021, the 2021 Gold Cup, the roster had James Sands, Eric Williamson, Sam Vines. These are all MLS guys, obviously. Paul Arriola, Jossie Zardes, Henry Kessler, Jackson Ewell. Brad Guzan was on that team too. People are like, why are they on there? And for the most part, a lot of those guys aren't U.S. level players. 2022 World Cup, the youth movement started to come in, but it was coupled with a lot of veteran players. You had Aaron Long, Jordan Morris, Christian Roldan, Kellen Acosta, Shaq Moore, Walker Zimmerman. Most of those guys weren't featured players, but they were on the roster. None of those guys are on the roster now. And it makes me wonder, except for Sean Johnson and Tim Ream, who doesn't count because he is making his trade in the Premier League. The question I asked, who pushed the button that said, we are going all youth? Somebody did. Was it Gregg Berhalter? Did he listen to everybody? Was it U.S. Soccer saying, let's get these European-based players in there? Because something happened. Because it went from 2023 to having 7 or 8 of those guys to 2 to none. Remember? And then all the reports, no MLS players on this roster, and people celebrated. Okay, fine. We got the most talented team. Sure. But it wasn't good enough, as we saw against Uruguay and Panama. And this, I think I'm seeing it when I talk to people, and less people are putting all of it on Berhalter, and some people, well, this team, and you can see it on social media, and that's obviously, again, not the best way to survey the landscape. But I do that. I talk to coaches, I talk to scouts, I talk to personnel, I talk to players. I'm in there. It's mostly MLS. It's the OG, baby. I have a Rolodex, dated reference, to talk to people. In the last 2 days, I talked to a lot of them. And they were all curious. There was criticism for Gregg Berhalter, but there was also saying, why would you play a team without any experience in these games, with very little experience? Why? I remember a conversation I had with Bruce Arena. He wouldn't dare do such a thing. And I'm going to tell you, for these folks that want pie in the sky, Jurgen Klopp or Thomas Tuchel, he will turn to these experienced players too. He might put in some MLS players. We may revert back to it. Because what we did, this spin to all the young players, felt out of the blue and somewhat unnatural. And we're left with a team that wasn't quite prepared for this moment. So Bruce Arena would always tell me, I will lean into experience. Many other coaches I've spoken to have said a similar thing. And we're kind of floored by what we saw. And in addition to having players that weren't experienced, you're fielding players that aren't featured on their club or not playing on their club. How many players like that did we have in the past? 1 or 2 on a roster? We have like 8. We have 8. We have Matt Turner, who's not playing. He's a backup. He's not going to play in the Premier League again. We have Tim Ream. He's no longer starting and getting old. Gio Reyna doesn't even have a club. The U.S. team is the only team that is willing to play him. Doesn't that strike you as a bit strange? We know Gio Reyna's got all the talent. He is the second most talented player. Now, is he worthy of playing on this national team in these big games? I don't know. I don't think so. Ricardo Pepi doesn't really play. Yunus Musa struggles to get in the lineup. Flo Balogun doesn't really deliver and is at risk of maybe losing his starting job from time to time. Weston McKennie playing for a bad Juventus team and had a good season. Okay. The 2 that you have is Christian Pulisic, who is not the guy at Milan, but one of the guys. and Anthony Robinson, who was the player of the year for Fulham. It's 2. Sergiño Dest, who wasn't even here. I mean, bouncing around from, granted, great clubs, but we're talking about not playing at all, not making 18-man rosters. Did anyone stop to think that this was a little strange? I didn't even stop to think about it. We just went in with it because we said, this is our best team. And now we can see it doesn't work. You need guys that are experienced. You need guys, and look, after these games, this group of guys have gained some experience. So that's a silver lining here. And now they know what that looks like, and they can go to the next thing. But we don't have a lot of next things right now. The next big thing is the World Cup. Between now and then, we don't have a lot. We don't have qualifiers. We don't really have good tests ahead of us. It's scary. So this was a good lesson. Do we feel better throwing the same group out there for an important game? I'm not. So the thing that, in hindsight, that's kind of floored me is none of us stopped to think about it. We were just so mesmerized about all these players playing in Europe, and God forbid an MLS player get in there, because heaven knows it couldn't be better than these European-based players, because if they were, why wouldn't they be in Europe? It's all this black and white stuff that is not pertinent. Doesn't make sense. You field your best players, you field experienced players, you field players who are the guys on their team. This conversation with Christian Pulisic and who's the best player. Landon Donovan was always the guy on his team. Clint Dempsey was always the guy on his team. Michael Bradley was the guy on his team. Josie Altidore was, for the most part, the guy on his team. So you didn't have to worry about that transition when they went to the national team. It was seamless. It's not seamless with this group of players. I don't know if we're going to go back. I have said it. I would have brought in 2 or 3 experienced guys, but if I tweeted that, I would have been absolutely eviscerated. If I said, let's put in Walker Zimmerman, let's put in Christian Roldan, even though he's not going to play. Let's put in, Aaron Long, I would have preferred than Chris Richards. I know you guys will show me, but remember the smear campaigns for Aaron Long and Walker Zimmerman when they made a mistake here and there. If we did a smear campaign for Cameron Carter-Vickers or Chris Richards, it would be endless. All they did was make mistakes, completely out of their depths, not ready for the prime time. And while these guys aren't as talented, they did a job when Walker Zimmerman was at the World Cup. Kellen Acosta, okay? I'm not saying to bring them back, but I also want to touch on what Tim Ream said about training and the fact that training is important. So even if you have players there that are pushing the featured guys, that is valuable. I know a lot of you people don't think that, but the coaches I speak to a coach, have all said it's good to have a guy like Christian Roldan or Jordan Mars there, pushing those guys, telling them what's it all about, what's it like to be a professional, because they've been through that. So I want some of those players on the roster. I think that will help. The other thing, it's just got to be natural. You've got to pick guys that are featured players. I don't think we can have guys that aren't playing. That came to roost clear as day against Panama and against Uruguay. Tim Weah doesn't play all the time. Does this not click? This is a problem, and we swept it under the rug. And for some reason, Gregg Berhalter worked with it. Maybe the biggest flaw for Gregg Berhalter was doing what everyone wanted and playing the kids. Maybe he should have stuck to some of the veteran guys. Couldn't have been any worse. We never had a team host the Copa America and not make the knockouts. Couldn't have been any worse. Couldn't score goals at the end. So maybe that's not a bad option. Maybe that was the biggest issue Gregg Berhalter had. I would say it's a few other things. But if we think you get rid of Gregg Berhalter, and this is going to get better, I got some beachfront property in Detroit, Michigan. I don't even know that analogy, but you know what I mean. We've got to get more guys stepping up, and they got to toughen up. And if we do have a coach who is a disciplinarian and comes in, how will this group respond? My guess is they won't respond well. I think they're a bunch of babies for the most part, and they're not going to like to get out of their comfort zone. And if we have an experienced coach, just say it's Jose Mourinho, and these guys are moaning, guess what's going to happen? He's going to replace them. So it's a bit of a conundrum, but this problem is a lot bigger because it's a lot bigger than Gregg Berhalter. These players are not ready, and we should have seen this coming. We should have seen this coming. Because I'm still floored. I really thought about it. I go, how do we get from 0 MLS players and everyone under the age of 25? No coach does it. And we'll see who steps up, because some guys are going to have to step up, because this isn't the same type of player we had that runs through walls. Some of them are, but this isn't the same one that would never quit. Tyler Adams, I haven't mentioned. He's certainly one of those guys. He hasn't been healthy. But we don't have enough of those guys. But who are going to be those guys? And we've got to find that out pretty soon, and we've got to find out in these games, because I think in reality the national team should look a lot different. I don't know if it will, but that's the idea with the new coach. He might have a different interpretation, and I think he will, because he's going to look at this group, and I think he's going to say, these guys aren't playing for their club. They're not playing for me. Food for thought. The Soccer OG. Check out the Soccer OG podcast where all podcasts are available. Like and subscribe us here. Pick your head up. We're going to get through this, but let's look at this at face value across the board. No one gets off the hook here. U.S. Soccer, Gregg, these players, the fans, whatever. We'll talk soon.